South African President Cyril Ramaphosa has set a target of $110 billion over the next 5 years for Africa's most industrialized economy. This would mean boosting foreign direct investment about 80% from current inflows. Ramaphosa announced this goal at the South Africa Investment Conference, describing it as lofty and not too impossible to achieve. But this also comes as the country's economy is facing a crisis with high unemployment rates and slow growth. The president did acknowledge the challenges facing South Africa, including energy, transport, and security. But he emphasized the need to address these issues to improve investor sentiment. Economists say South Africa has a lot to offer investors, including well-developed infrastructure, a skilled workforce, and abundant natural resources. However, the country needs to address some of the challenges that have deterred investors in the past, such as corruption, policy uncertainty, and a lack of progress in implementing economic reforms. Joining me now is Ikos Akpovayan. He's Chief Investment Officer for Ovid Capital, and he joins me from South Africa. Ikos, welcome again to Business Edge. It's good to see you after some time. Thank you for joining me.
You're welcome.
All right, so let's look at this in terms of the number of conferences. Not too many that have been had, but this is the fourth investment conference that South Africa has held since 2018. And the president to date said about 460 billion rand of capital has been invested in infrastructure developments across sectors of the economy. In terms of how the economy and South Africans have benefited, let's start from there. What real investments, what genuine and concrete, tangible positives have come from these investment conferences?
These investors' conferences, they allow the government to speak directly to investors, especially the local ones and the foreign investors, to direct investment and increase the FDI of the South African economy. It's quite... There's certain things that come out, and there's engagement from government, and the president has to engage with these investors to elevate their fears. The South African economy has struggled, as we all know, and the same thing as most economies in the continent. But if a government is speaking directly to the investors, it's very important, especially the president being and giving the trust and direct word to investors who are willing to come to the country. So this shows, and these conferences are quite important. It should not be underestimated by government or other governments in Africa.
Okay, so when we look at this, this is the direct work you do, particularly with those looking to invest in South Africa. Give us the feedback that you've been getting from investors in terms of their sentiment towards the South African economy and investments there. What are the issues that you see have repeatedly come up when investors are looking at South Africa, and then they might say, there's just too much uncertainty going on there. I should just keep my money for now. What are you hearing?
Yes, look, we've had COVID, we've had international factors that has affected growth. There's been a war in Ukraine, which has caused a global inflation. So first of all, you look at the global inflation issue, and there's been some excess money in certain parts of the world. And those money are looking for growth in emerging markets where they can get the return. But obviously, those kind of money are looking at the risk and where to go into. South Africa has been very attractive where it's located in Africa, and there's been huge appetite of investors to emerging markets and have a footprint in Africa. So these companies and these investors would like to choose which country, even despite the risks and the challenges. One of the investors look at is the political stability of a country and its smooth transition of power, which has really good in South Africa. There's been few unrest. There was an unrest in 2021. There's been a crime issue in which the president assured investors that they're being tackled. One of the biggest issues of the fears of investors is the electricity problem. And government has shown in the last few months since this year, there was a state of national disaster of electricity. And the government has created a ministry for electricity and have a minister of electricity. So government will do their part. These things do take time, and investors like to see that government is proactive and they put in instruments and tools to alleviate their fears and consign. Of course, it's an employment and especially youth employment problem. But if these investments are not coming in to create jobs, they can be catastrophic for the country and also other parts of the world.
So as you mentioned, of course, government and working with the investors, let's look at a governance issue that South Africa seems to have had. State capture has been at the center of South Africa's governance, right from Jacob Zuma's administration to even the unfolding Falafala farm gates involving President Ramaphosa. And what we've seen is that South Africa also was recently grey listed by the Financial Action Task Force. So, Ecos, when we look at some of these issues that are unfortunately parts right now and parcel of the South African states, how have these issues had potential consequences or ramifications when it comes to investors in the country?
Yes, so look, we were all worried about the grey listing by a FATF, and the government went into action. The president has gone into action. A team has been set, a task force team, to look at the issues from the Reserve Bank and the FIC, the Financial Intelligence Center. They've been taking these the issues very seriously. And government, South Africa, has met most of all the requirements that was of concern to the FATF. So that's big. The other concern, of course, is corruption. Corruption that's been going on in the private sector and in government. Like I say, investors want to see that government is taking proaction to prevent and reverse some of these issues. One of the issues you mentioned was Palapala. If you have noticed, Palapala issue, it was an issue that came up just before the last year. And I know myself and the investors, international investors, were looking. So one thing investors do is to look at the political issue and see how much the issue affects its domestic operation of government and how much it can affect international investors. So investors will see if it's just mainly a domestic issue. It's been handled, it's in the court, and the president has promised to follow the rules of laws. Although it's been protected by his party, for now, the president is safe. The rule of law has been followed, and everyone has a first say. He's not repressed anywhere yet. And so investors, internationally, the sentiment we are getting is that it's not as bad internationally as we're seeing in the local politics in the country. So it's not something I think investors at the moment would be worried about.
Okay, I think that would be some good news, of course, with hearing that there's movement to resolve it, but also, of course, hearing that it's not too much of something that's dampening investor sentiment. So, Ecos, let's look at the president's targets. President Ramaphosa said $110 billion in foreign direct investment over the next 5 years. Do you think this is a little too ambitious, or does South Africa really have the potential to attract that much foreign investments? Of course, we realize we're in very tough economic times right now. Conversations about rising interest rates, what things are going to look like economically in the next 2 to 3 years. When you look at this target and this projection, is it something that you think South Africa can hit?
I think, from my own point of view, I've seen some news that this is really ambitious. I don't think it's ambitious. When you look at the global terrain and you look at countries South Africa trying to compete with, if you look at countries like Malaysia, countries like Indonesia, they've attracted 5 times what South Africa is trying to attract. So it's not something far-fetched. And when you look at the value, the target of this, what you've mentioned, is 2 trillion. The initial target in 2018 was 1.2 trillion. And from in 5 years, South Africa has had commitments and pledges of 1.14 trillion rands, which is over 90% of the target. And the president has moved the bar for the next 5 years to make 2 trillion rands. I don't think that is far-fetched. And then one of the things you have to take into consideration, if you look at the rand, what it was in 2018, and what the rand is now, you see in the rand value, it's a very doable target. And like I said, when you compare it with other countries, what they are raising now, and these investments are all investments in terms of factories, commitment, moving operation, building production. So it's very, very, very doable. I don't think it's far-fetched.
So this should be doable even despite economic headwinds, low business confidence, and even dampened investor sentiment. So let's look at this, Eko. South Africa was able to raise about 300 billion rand from pledges in its first investment conference in 2018. Now, subsequent ones have attracted about 1.14 trillion rand in investment pledges. But this is not free money. This is money that, of course, wants to invest and get some good returns on its investment. So when we look at the investment opportunities that exist right now for foreign direct investments in South Africa, let's go at the specific sectors, the sectors that you think are going to have the most interest from foreign investors. Where do you think that attention is really going to be over the next 5 years?
We've seen investment in energy and electricity, in solar manufacturing, to aid and boost the local solar manufacturing and create jobs. I mean, electricity is one of the biggest gainers in this sector, because it's quite clearly South Africa electricity needs and the kind of growth it's going to experience in the next few years. It really needs to tackle the emergency electricity problem, and it has to be a lot of investment from government and foreign investors and also local investors. Also in agriculture, as South African population grows and there's also migration, is very important, and we've seen some investment. Just in the last conference, there was a pledge of 300 million in the agro industry. So these two sectors are very important. The sectors that will see very good growth to investors, and the sectors that will impact the South African economy and create jobs. Creating jobs is one of the center right now for government, especially for the youths. So anything that's going to create jobs and create them massively is always very welcomed.
All right, Coach, before I let you go, investment hopes to get the best return for its money at the long run. But there's still a lot of work for the South African government to do. And it's good to hear that the president did acknowledge the challenges that are ahead of the country in terms of bringing in this foreign direct investment. But when it comes to economic and structural reforms that are a must for the government to implement, what are your top, let's say, 3 or 4 of the economic and structural reforms that would make the president's targets a reality?
Look, the economic reform, there's local, so when you look at labor, so in South Africa, there's been huge pressure from labor and of course in the opposition party to push the country on one edge on this labor policy. And the government is looking for a balance. There was a team, an economic team that was set up to look at this. And so far, a report was out just before this conference, and that report indicated that South Africa is on the right track, even if there's some struggle in terms of different areas which investors were worried about. And one of the areas was easy movement and skilled visas for foreign employees to come into the country, for skills exchange and immigration issue that also spawned the xenophobia we've seen over the years, and that's been tackled by the government. I know there's so many issues in the country, but personally I'm very optimistic. And what I like to say is that even at times like this, when things look very bleak, because these investments are long-term, you begin to feel the effects very well within 5 years. What is being done now has to be done, and I'm very glad they are being done.
All right, so we look forward to seeing some more positives from this. Ikos Apokovayan, thank you so much for your time as usual, and I look forward to seeing you again soon.
Thank you. Thank you, Tolu.